Hi. Before listening to this podcast, I would like to let you know that these episodes of podcasts are made available 48 hours earlier in our audio platforms. You can search us on Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, JioSaavn, and all other audio platforms. The links are given in the description. I highly recommend that you go and listen it from there. And for now, enjoy the video. Thank you.
Mental health disorder is a rising issue. Globally, more than 264 million people of all ages suffer from depression. Study shows there are only 3 psychiatrists for every 100,000 population in India, and experts are predicting a surge in anxiety, panic, and stress in the coming years. The symptoms are so vague, and even if they are not critical, they can affect our relationships and our careers dramatically. So we need some homely tools that are effective with least side effects and are very, very easy to apply. Hi, welcome to the first episode of Master Within podcast. I am Souvik Ghosh, the host of this show. Each week, I bring you a unique perspective to deal with your mind and help you to master the most effective time management and social skills so that you can become more happy, productive, and successful. Today we'll explore the feelings of stress, anxiety, and depression and how we can step out from that kind of thinking using 7 easy steps. You know, we all take medicines for treatment, for special ailments. But it is our own diet from where we take our nutrients on a daily basis, isn't it? Similarly, stress is also a part of being human. It is not something we usually need to deal with medicines all the time, but they can be dealt with using some normal and simple changes in our mental habits. The techniques that we'll see today are not just some tools, but are the pathways that can entirely modify the relationship we have with our mind and with our social conditions. I don't know if you have noticed just how much stress comes from our own thinking. I'm always reminded of this when I think back to my days in college. Just before my final year exams, there was a wedding in our family, the wedding of my niece. And her father, my uncle, was suddenly diagnosed with a terminal illness at the last hour. At the time, my father already had a lot going about his business, that all the pressure of the joint family suddenly came upon his head. Taking this opportunity, my father's business partner betrayed him, and half of his share was ruined in a single day. What a disaster it was. He soon acquired a severe repressive depression disorder. It was the first time in my life I saw my father so distraught and broken. My mother was super supportive, but her cries broke my heart every day. And eventually, I had to take charge and also had to miss my practical exams of physics secretly, which obviously affected my results, whose reason I couldn't even discuss publicly at that time. I was in a puzzle. Suddenly, the world I knew was not easy anymore. And this was a perfect excuse for my external situations, to take charge of my mind and my conscience. These kind of situations are very common everywhere. Even much worse time came later in my life, and even further worse situations come in my friends and other people's lives. I saw them with very close eyes. But I took this example only because this was the first time I realized it is not the situations that are thrown at us that define our state of mind, but it is how we respond to them. Let us think like this. If I throw a stone in the sea, it'll just sink down. But a large ship having tons of weight has no difficulty to stay afloat no matter how heavy it is. Therefore, in reality, the weight is not the issue, the burden is not the issue. It is the shape and structure of the system that keeps a vessel afloat. Our mind often works like this. Physically, it may be shapeless, but if we look at it carefully, it has its own structure that can change its form with persistent habits and persistent situations. This is called a mindset. Mindset is the filter through which each of us perceive our experiences and respond or react to them accordingly. If we can consciously change our mindset, we will become like the ship in the ocean of problems. No matter how much burden is put by our external situations, we can always swim through them. We must learn to acknowledge the fact that, to a large extent, we are the writers of our own future. Of course, external situations matter, but they are more like the weather, always changing and impermanent. They can be storm, they can be rain, they can be scorching heat of summer. But to deal with it, or to be disturbed by it, actually depends on us. We can be depressed and curse our fate and curse the weather. But do you know what the wise people do? They utilize those situations to their own benefits. Maybe they'll use the scorching sun rays to form solar electricity, or they can also use rainwater to form rainwater harvest, and all other strange things that leaders do throughout the world. But they never stop predicting the positive outcomes in the future. They are optimistic giants. If somehow we learn this and turn this into our habit, it will not be hard to gradually become the master of our own fate and our own situations. I know what many of you might be thinking now. Of course, this is not easy, and I completely agree with you. But still, I'll try to make it as easy as possible. Remember, this is an applied truth. These have shown results and helped many people. Remember, the Master shows us the way, but the execution is upon our own actions. Now let us be calm for a moment and listen carefully. Scientists have discovered there are some chemicals that are released in our brain that are the cause behind the happiness. Chemicals like dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. Study shows it is the external impulses that trigger these hormones, like a funny video or a moment of success or a moment of happiness, a delicious meal that we had yesterday. They trigger these impulses and release the happy hormones in our brain, and we feel jolly. But here we aspire to have the mastery over this system, where we can stay above our external stimuli and uplift our mood according to our will. So we shall look at it from an entirely different perspective. If we take a closer look to our mind, we can see that we have some passions controlling us. Some of these passions, or you can call them complexes, some of these complexes are within us from since our birth. They are passed down through genetics, but many of them are developed over the years with our experience of life in this world. We often think we have a kind of free will and can do whatever we want, but only for a moment. Sooner or later, that will, that intense will of activity, suddenly gets lost. It is because the passions that we have are not hold to a strong foundation. As a result, our mind gets easily affected by the waves of redundant cravings that are aroused from outside. Think of this like a boat. A small boat which is tied to a strong rope on the riverside with a huge trunk of a tree. The river is flowing with its waves. The boat is undulating. The rope is waving, but the boat is at the same place. No matter how high the waves are and the boat moves up and down, but it never sways down the stream. It stays put. This is the signs of untottering conviction. No matter who we are or how beautiful our mind boat is, if it is not bound tightly with a strong rope to a strong and with standstill tree trunk, it is bound to be washed away by environment waves. That is why having an ideal in our life is so effective. If our mind can perceive an embodiment to which our tendrils of passions can firmly attach themselves, then we can stay put on our goals, on our mission. Then we can easily differentiate between our objectives and the distractions that come in our way. This is the first step. This is the first way, which is the mostly ignored solution that science gives us. The second step. Just like the change of mind can affect our body, so do the body can have the same effect on our mind. The most important way to take charge of our mind is by involving ourselves in some positive activities. Usually the activities that we love to do, like I am making this podcast in my free time. In this way, my sensory passions are always engaged in producing the outputs I desire practically, which in turn gives me that dopamine feedback and I get out of my stress. And again, it is producing the solutions I desire. Step number 3, the motor sensory coordination. If some good idea comes to us, we need to work it out as early as possible. This way, the coordination between our motor and sensory nervous system will stay intact. We will be able to manifest whatever idea that comes to us, and we'll be happy. Grief is nothing but the desire unfulfilled, and this actually happens due to the lack of coordination of our motor and sensory nervous system. That's why we have to practice and make it more coordinated with coming days. Step number 4, the more we think of our own body and mind, our own looks, the more we'll get drowned in its shortcomings. No body or no mind is perfect. It is what it is. Look outside. Serve your environment. Serve the people around you in whatever way you can. This will make your personality intact and will make it progressive. Step number 5. Gossips are fun, but we must also acknowledge the fact that just like someone is the object of my gossip, I can also be the topic of someone else's gossip. It is human nature. So we shall try to stay as much passive about these unnecessary gossips, but welcome our criticisms as opportunities for our own personal development. I know it is hard to consider, but it is not impossible to execute. Step number 6, the positive affirmations or autosuggestion. It is another great way, but we will explain it in one of the coming episodes since it is a large topic to be covered. Last but not the least, 7th step. I know that most of us often get fascinated by the complexity of structures, but it is the balanced simplicity that brings more efficiency in our life. Try to minimize your needs as simply as possible. Great Master says, true material development is the spiritual development. And spiritual development means necessary material development. This necessary material development is the key. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Master Within podcast. In this episode, we have learned What causes our stress and anxiety, and how can we deal with it? At the end, we have given 7 most effective solutions that can minimize the problems in our life. You can access the show notes or summary of this episode by visiting masterwithin.org/podcast or by simply clicking the link we have provided in the episode description. If you like, you can subscribe to the show wherever you get a podcast from. I hope you've learned something from this. And if you did, let me know your biggest takeaway from this episode on our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or QApp @MasterWithinOfficial. Thank you so much. I'll catch you guys on the next episode. Peace is always out there. Sometimes we just have to take a step back and realize from a different perspective that we experience the enormous amount of willpower that is latent within.